Hello and welcome to a new world building video. This time I'm going to be discussing a race I've invented called the Nautikans. If you haven't seen it, I made a whole series of videos about creating a system of clothing to suit their race and culture. Now I'm going to break down their biology, which maybe should have taken precedence over clothing, but I like clothes. I've drawn inspiration from a variety of cultures, pillaging them for parts in my world building endeavors. But my world is not meant to reflect our society or other real-life cultures. It's a thought experiment. If I set specific biological limitations on a people group, what might the ramifications for their culture be? Or how does a fantasy race's biology impact their cultural norms? And one more thing, my last series of world building videos took 5 months to finish because I was insanely overcommitted on art. As I am now attempting to work up to 1 video a week, I'm trying a new approach, which is to only make the minimum amount of art required to illustrate my ideas. Everything else I'll just fill in with stock photos from the internet. The good thing about this strategy is that as I get faster at art and as my videos build on subject matter, I should be able to reuse a lot of the art and slowly wean off stock photos. But let me know what you think of this solution and if you have a different preference or idea.
In my world, mermaids do exist. All are female and they reproduce asexually. There are a few different subspecies, but all are wild, unfriendly to other races, and range far out in the deep, remote parts of the ocean. Nautikans are distantly related to mermaids, but have a very different and much more human biology. In fact, Nautikans consider being called a mermaid as something of a slur. Mermaids are born from eggs and grow up as part of a pod, but without a specific mother to raise them. They have tails, fins, gills, and specialized vocal openings that allow them to communicate underwater. They spend the majority of their lives below the waves, roaming freely across the seas, hunting for food and sport, visiting island lagoons, and harassing any ships that stray too far out. Their culture is overall fairly primitive. They do not build structures and use only a few rudimentary tools for hunting. This does not mean they are unintelligent, but that their full potential lies dormant, untapped. Their society is organized around a simple dominance hierarchy, based on physical strength, skill, and cunning. Nautikans have a few different biological factors that make them vastly different from mermaids. For one, though they are born from eggs like mermaids and have tails for the first few years of their lives, they eventually shed their tails, metamorphosing into walking bipeds. The children typically grow out of their tails between the ages of 4 and 6, though there are late bloomers. It is only after metamorphosis that a child begins to adhere to gender norms, for though parents may guess at a child's sex before that, it can't be conclusively established. It also means that although grown Nautikans are perfectly capable of living on land, and many prefer it, their central societies can never build far from a large body of water, as it will be an absolute necessity for families with young children. There is a key difference between Nautikan females and human females, which has a tremendous impact on their culture. Their bodies, rather than releasing 1 egg a month for approximately 20 years, releases the entire cache at once. It happens in their early 20s, and they can subliminally sense it coming roughly a year in advance, but they cannot intuit the precise week the eggs will be fertile. This impacts their culture by ramping up to an 11, the proverbial biological clock, which human females have to contend with. Human females have until about the age of 35 to sort out their career and family plans, which is a vast generalization, but as far as I know, it is the generally accepted norm. Nautikan women have that time frame shortened by a decade. This creates tremendous pressure for young ladies to find a suitable life partner at a younger age, because they get no second chances. They have one shot at having a family and continuing their family line. If they fail to find a partner or settle for an unsuitable one, the consequences will be immediate and apparent. This overall does tend to make their culture more conservative. The women aren't as willing to take risks when they only have one chance. The men, though their situation is not as dire as the women's, also feel the competition and the pressure. This gives the Nautikans a reputation for being serious and stern. Because females can only have children with one male, this affects their concept of marriage. It is literally defined as being bonded through children. Wedding ceremonies are performed as celebrations after a pregnancy is established, because at that point there is no going back for a couple. They have the freedom to choose only until the choice is made. 2 Nautikans with children would be considered married whether there had been a ceremony or not, and a couple without children would be considered partners, but that's it. Though a male technically could have children with more than one female, that is considered a serious offense and abominable behavior, equal to bigamy. Egg theft is also a capital crime. The females release all of their eggs at once because of the breakdown between combining aquatic and human DNA. It is one of the unpredictable side effects of such genetic alterations. However, though all eggs will be released at once, not all will be fertilized. Generally between 3 to 5 eggs will develop, though the legendary mermaid who founded the Nautikan race, Arena, was said to have 12. The eggs will be delivered when each reach approximately the size of a coconut, to finish growing and developing independently. Great care must be taken. The eggs must be kept submerged in a nutrient-rich environment. You can actually watch the babies develop through the thick, rubbery membranes of the eggs during the last trimester before birthing, or hatching. This means that all siblings are technically twins, or multiples, though identical twins developing inside a single egg are unheard of, as it will cause the egg membrane to rupture prematurely. If confronted with identical mainlander twins, I think their reaction would be simultaneously, "What's the big deal?" and a freaked out, "WTF, do you mean you're identical?" The children's technical birth order is established by the hatching order, which can span days or even weeks. In the rare case that only a single egg successfully develops, the resulting only child will carry the entirety of the weight and expectations of their family line. This also means that although motherhood comes quickly and intensely, all children are raised at once, and a mother will be done in her early 40s, ready to move on to the next stage of life, whatever she chooses that to be. Females who miss their fertile period are at least afforded the luxury of certainty. They have a few options. Some do well focusing on careers, and society does make room for them in the public space. Some seek to adopt, lifting a child or two from women who delivered more than they can handle. But some do spiral. Childless women have complete equality with men, though women with children still in their care are expected to be the primary caretakers, and are forbidden from military or guard duties. Young men struggle as well, for the women are incredibly choosy. With little time for romance, they must judge the men based on reputation and surface characteristics. This creates a fierce competition, a jostling environment for the men, and if a man fails to attract an eligible young woman, he might have to settle for one who cannot give him the chance to carry on his line. I think that for upper-class families, those who don't want to risk their line ending, there would definitely exist some kind of professional matchmakers to help arrange pairings. The elderly are respected and cared for. It is the working-age adults who are responsible for providing for their parents and grandparents. Elderly Nautikans with no children must rely on their savings or else public charity. In the old days, when Nautikans were spread in groups across the mainland, they had a lifespan equivalent to an average mainlander. However, now that they have returned to the sea and live in the submerged city, the lifespans seem to be lengthening. There are many still alive now who remember living on the mainland, until the wars began 100 years prior. All Nautikans are born with gills, and keep them post-metamorphosis. They are perfectly capable of living underwater indefinitely, however they do not have the vocal openings of mermaids, and therefore cannot speak with other Nautikans underwater. They do have a well-developed sign language, which is used for basic communication underwater, but it is not the same as speaking. They cannot debate, can't share their feelings. In short, time spent underwater lessens their grip on empathy and humanity. But because of their children, they cannot completely leave the water behind. Thus, they are always caught at a conflict, where the sea meets the land. Nautikans are extremely tolerant to cold, almost completely unaffected. They have a much higher metabolism than humans, allowing them to produce more internal body heat, and causing their body temperature to run several degrees warmer than humans. However, to maintain this, they must consume a higher level of calories, with a diet containing more animal fats and oils than a human requires. When swimming in Arctic temperatures, they will often insulate themselves by coating their bodies in grease or animal fat to further trap heat. This will allow them to swim even in the coldest waters without freezing. In the heat, they do not do so well. Above land, they are very susceptible to dry air and direct sunlight. They need to moisturize regularly, particularly their gills and lips, or their skin will crack and bleed. They have to consume high quantities of water to maintain equilibrium. They have a low melanin count, with very pale, ivory skin. In the direct sunlight, their burn time is only a couple of minutes. They will suffer heat stroke 4 times faster than a human. If they do not take care to cover up, their skin will quickly develop permanent dark sunspots. Because of this, when they did live above land, they always covered up in hats and lightweight layers of shawls and veils, protecting their sensitive skin. That, adding to the fact that their culture is generally grave and reserved, gives the mainlanders the impression that they are highly conservative, and that the layers of clothing they wear in public are for modesty's sake. However, if they were to be invited to the home of a Nautikan, as soon as the door was closed and the heavy shades drawn, the Nautikans would shed their layers to something much more revealing than most mainlanders were accustomed to. By contrast, in the winter, Nautikans wear less layers than they do in the summer heat. They favored cool and especially humid climates, and flocked around areas with a high water presence. Coastlines, lakes, rivers, marshes, etc. The local cultures that developed would vary greatly depending on what type of biome they settled in, and what other mainland cultures they contacted. A family of swamp Nautikans would be very different from a family of Nautikans living along a mountain river. They would not be able to survive arid climates well at all, and would avoid places like tropics, deserts, savannas, or even plains. Their hair is tightly curled and textured, and ranges in color from light brown to nearly black. If long, it is rarely left loose. Instead, a complicated set of braids will be tightly plaited into the hair, And for the females especially, sets of hair jewelry will be woven into the braids. Bangles, chains, and medallions will sit across the forehead. Beads and rings will be threaded through the braids, and they will be capped off with dangling tassels or aglets. If one does not fancy the maintenance this would require, heads are shaved and pre-braided wigs can be worn if desired. Nautikans have little to no body hair, sparse eyebrows, and sparse facial hair for the men. Their facial features I imagine as somewhere between black and Asian, and because I rely heavily on reference images for art, I found that the faces I was drawn to for reference were usually of multiracial people, with pale skin and tight coiled curls. I like the curly hair for Nautikans for aesthetic reasons, and the idea of the hair flowing loose and free underwater, but then messily coiling up when it dries out, very frustrating. And the pale skin is important for naturalistic reasons, namely that there are less UV rays under seawater, so melanin levels would be quite low. I also picture Nautikans as having very large, almost even bulging eyes. The eyes would be pale silver, green, blue, or amethyst, or some combination, and would match the scale coloration they were born with. Their nostrils are narrow and slitted, and the Nautikans have muscular control over them, capable of closing the slits at will to keep their airways dry underwater. When Nautikans are born, they have tails and gills. The gills are pairs of ridged vertical slits along their necks, stretching from behind the base of their ear almost to the collarbone. They are born breathing water, and do not learn to breathe air for the first couple of years, but once they learn, they'll surface often, where they learn how to speak from their parents. But they must stay moist, so they sleep underwater, play underwater, and eat underwater. They do not learn how to walk until their legs and feet finish developing. Poorly developed or malformed feet are a common problem, and signifies early malnutrition. Another abnormal development that could occur would be a Nautikan who never went through metamorphosis, and who retained their tail into adulthood. This could happen for purely medical reasons, or it could originate with a lack of mental or emotional development, perhaps being stuck in an unhealed trauma, or an unwillingness to leave childhood behind and step into an adult role, or a crisis of identity, unable to decide who they are and who they want to be. To sum up how their biology affects their culture, it makes the Nautikans a serious, no-nonsense people, with great intelligence and problem-solving ingenuity. They have a very strict set of moral standards they hold each other to, though not necessarily the mainlanders. They have specific abilities and limitations that mandate the necessity to take a different approach to life. They are family-oriented. Their children are their future. They are nature's bridge between the sea and the shore. Currently hiding at the bottom of the sea, they anticipate the time they can rise up and take back their cities from the mainlanders who pushed them out.
And I thank you so much for listening. If you'd like to hear more about the Nautikans or other races I've developed for my world, then please subscribe. If you think the culture would have developed in a different direction, or that I've made a major error in my logic, one that can't be covered by the "It's magical science fiction" banner, please let me know in the comments. I find audience tips very helpful. I take liberties according to what seems rational to me, but I'm not a scientist, just one person with a computer.